I'm Lynn Miller-Pease. I'm the CEO of Leadership Everyone. And this is one of our favorite things to do is we love to gather people together and then ask somebody amazing like Lori to talk. I'm going to embarrass her. Yay. And what we do is we're going to record this, and not only will we all get to hear about what she's sharing with equity and diversity and all those things, but then we can share it out to a whole bunch more people in case this time period didn't work just so for them. So basically what we do is we let the person who's speaking, like Lori, she's going to talk for 20 plus minutes, and she can go a little longer if she wants. Hold on, Corbell, I swear to God. And then we're going to have some time for some comments, and we can ask questions on chat. We can do it verbally. And then if you think of a question, or if you need something later that you think of later, we'll get that question to Lori, or I will make up an answer and email it. Oh, no, we'll get it to Lori. All right, so let me tell you just a little bit about Lori. I'm going to have her tell you about her business and all of that kind of thing. But Lori and I got to know each other through being on the diversity lecture series and a mutual friend, great friend, Susan Hardwick. Lori and I've never worked together. We don't live next door, but we were given an opportunity to really get to know each other. And this is a woman who absolutely says things the way they are. She's real, she's down to earth, she's incredibly knowledgeable, she has a vast amount of experience in all kinds of different things, and she's really open and able to discuss things of all different kinds of ways and possibilities. So you are absolutely in for a treat. Lori, do you know how to get a boxer to shut up? But anyway, so I very quickly, especially since Corbell Wiggles will not be quiet, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to suggest we all mute ourselves except for Lori. And then if we've got a question later, we'll unmute so that we're not having too much noise. You know, my animals obey me about as well as my children. I'm so proud. All right, I'm at this point going to turn over, get your full attention to Lori Sutton. She is amazing in the work in equity, diversity, how to make things work. And she's also a huge community member with a giant heart. I give you Lori Sutton.
Thank you, Lynn. The funny thing about Lynn, every time I talk to Lynn, first, she knows I get upset when she just goes on and on and on. She knows that I get upset about that. Because I always tell people that the work that I'm doing, I never thought, I'm an accountant by degree. So I'll give you a little bit of background on me. But the funny thing about Lynn is I was like, so what exactly do you want me to talk about? And Denise, I know Denise is probably like I was on her nerves after a while. But Lynn is like, and Denise both, it's whatever you want to talk about. So I'm like, and how much time do I have? Because I can just keep on talking. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I see some familiar names and faces, and so I'm looking forward to sharing with you today. So before I get into the presentation, and I'm gonna share my screen, and I've got some audio as well, and hopefully this is all gonna work out. And if it doesn't, that's fine too, because I can continue to talk. But just a little bit about me. So I've been in this space for a little over 10 years. I had the privilege to work at Vectren, and I decided to move on to other opportunities. And so I began my journey in diversity, inclusion, and equity at Vectren. And so Vectren was doing some amazing things when I was there, and really appreciate all of the work that our senior leaders did to help us move that discussion forward. And I always tell people that in this space, it is a marathon, it is not a sprint. In order for it to be sustainable, it has to be an ongoing commitment to it. So I moved to Berry Global, and so I'm doing, Berry Global, and then I have my my passion that I'm doing independently. But at Berry, I am the corporate director of HR, and then also the global director of diversity and inclusion. And so, in my HR role, I've got like 500 people, and then in the global, it's like 48,000. So started at Barry, love working at Barry, love the experiences that I'm having there. The senior leadership is very committed to, everything we're doing in this space. And I decided while I was working at Barry that I wanted to start my own consulting business. And Lisa, she's laughing because she has been on this journey with me. I didn't know how this was all going to play out, but they were fully supportive of me doing this. And so I'm very appreciative to Barry for allowing me to help other organizations as we are moving forward as an organization as well. So Jade Consulting launched in, I think it was September. And I started it because I just love this work. And I feel that when you are in this space, it took me a while to get here, but your work is not just for the company that you work for. You are trying to impact the community. And so I've always done things to try to help organizations move forward. And then one day I was like, you know what, I think I want to try to do this as a consultant. And so I've had a lot of organizations and individuals that have already joined. So Jade stands for Join a Distinct Evolution, because I feel that this space, it's evolutionary and it's always moving. And so Lynn has given me a lot of opportunities to share my vision. And so that's what I would love to do today, is to just kind of walk through. And I was trying to think about like what would be the primary thing that I would like to focus on today. I wanted to talk about, because all of you, including myself, are in the community. And so I thought, well, that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with, let's just talk about this from a community perspective. And so I want to talk about just the reality of today. And when you think about the reality of today, you can think of many things. You can think of, we've got the pandemic. And I tell people we have multiple pandemics going on. Of course, the health pandemic, we have the racial pandemic, we have just families in general, because people are dealing with, you're starting to find out how much you love the people that you live with. You're spending so much time with them, or animals, or, whatever it could be. But that is our reality today. And so, so just the current events, and some of these, they are current or they are still of discussion. When you think about the Me Too, sometimes when I think about the Me Too and how that conversation came to be, and it was in the news, the next thing you know, the pandemic, COVID-19 took over. And then we got into, where there were some remarks that were made that made cultural perspective. And that's where I saw the picture where it says, I am not a virus. So then we moved into it, talking about different cultures and just the health pandemic. And then we moved into Black Lives Matter again. And then the next thing we start talking about the election and all of that. And then we moved into the Capitol situation. And so when I think about all these things from a diversity, inclusion, and equity, I see some of these things as they can become distractions, and that could be positive or negative. But the thing when you're in this space is you have to remember is that it's always going to be changing. There's always going to be something that we are talking about. But the main thing that I want to get across today is, how did we get here? How do we move forward? And how do we react to these current events? Because I had shared with someone when I was talking to them just about the pandemic and just talking about mental health. And I said, if people say that they are not dealing with something from a mental health perspective, they're telling themselves a story. Because all of these things, no matter what they are within society, within your workplace, whatever, you carry these things with you. And so this is very important when it comes to inclusion, because all of us are bringing something with us. And so I want to get into this video, and hopefully you will be able to hear this. And so the question that I'm asking when you're watching this video, it tells you about how did we get here. So hopefully you can hear that.
It's so easy to place people in boxes. drawing lines, creating sides. There's us, and there's them. Those we feel comfortable around, and those we don't. There are those of us with many chapters, and those just starting their own stories. There's the well-to-do, and those doing what they can. There are those we share something with, and those we don't seem to share anything with.
Welcome, and thank you for coming today, guys. Today I'm going to be conducting an experiment where I'll ask you a series of questions. Now, these questions will be very personal questions, and for us to get a true result, I need you to be completely honest with how you respond. The first question I have is, who in here was the class clown? Who is never on time?
And then there's us. We who have tattoos. We who feel lonely.
So the first time I saw that video, I absolutely loved it. And it's like a 10 minute video. But the thing about it is we put people in boxes, and we usually put people in boxes within, I think it's like the first 30 seconds of when we meet someone. And the reason why we put people in boxes is because we're looking at our past, we're thinking about past experiences and assumptions. And that's what leads us to whatever point of view we have. And when you're thinking about equity, one of the things that when you look at equality and equity is that they are two different terms, and sometimes individuals use them interchangeably. But when you think about equity, you're thinking about where are people starting from and taking that into account when you're trying to build inclusion. And so all of us, how we see the world, how we respond to things, it always comes from our past experiences. And sometimes I don't think we give ourselves enough grace to know that that's where they're coming from. But if you're not operating and opening up your mind, you're going to have the same point of view, you're going to have the same decisions and the same outcomes, and you're just going to keep going in this loop over and over and over. And so when you think about current events, things are just replaying. They are replaying. If you go back in history, a lot of these things that are happening, you can ask people, I'm not surprised. When that happened at the Capitol, that did not surprise me at all. It was building up to that. And so where do these things come from? Past experiences, but it's our biases. We all have biases, regardless of if we want to admit them or not, we do have them. And that leads us to put people in these boxes. But the main thing that we have to think about when we're trying to build inclusive communities is that your point of view is not the only point of view. You may have an experience that leads you to think that your point of view is the only view, but in order for you to be inclusive, you have to think about other people's points of view. And the reason why is because you want to take into account the networks that people have. I always share with people, if everyone in your network looks just like you, you have an inclusion issue. Because I think that now within the world, we all have access to so many different things. And regardless of, if we, I know my mom used to say, run in the same circles. You have access and you should be able to use your networks and then just kind of look through that. But past experiences really are the foundation to how we come to these different outcomes and how we put people in boxes. And so in order to kind of take us out of the boxes. In that video, he was just asking just different things. And it's really just shifting. And whether that's our mindset or whether it's how we go about living our daily lives, how we interact with people in the workplace and the community, you really have to shift from a tactical approach to more of a strategic approach. And so in a corporation, you kind of think of it from the going beyond compliance processes is really around like affirmative action and anything that you have to, it's almost like a check the box exercise. That's when you have to really shift past that if you really want to embrace true diversity, inclusion, and equity. You have to be intentional. You have to make a conscious effort to make that happen because it's not going to happen on its own. It does have to come from the top down. When it comes to this space, it cannot be, now you can have people from the bottom up kind of helping to bring the conversation forward, but in order for it to really be successful, you have to have someone from the top that is helping to drive this. And so when I think about it from a community perspective, I'm totally making this up, but there's truth in it. But when I think about it from a community perspective, we think about, how do we access dollars, whether it's from a state or, things like that. Are we bringing into the conversation individuals who are diverse? And that's the broader sense of diversity when those decisions are being made. Because if everyone who's making those decisions look alike, they've had the same experiences, you're kind of staying within that compliance box. And so as you move through this continuum, you start to be committed to the business case. And one of the things with the business case is it's just that you have to, it's like an elevator speech, like why are we doing that? Why are we doing this? And so I know early on when I first started working in DEI, people would say to me, well, this is the right thing to do. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. It is the right thing to do, but it's the wrong thing when you just keep saying it's the right thing, but you don't have a business case, because people need to see this as strategic. This is not, something that's going to go away. And unfortunately, but fortunately, current events have demonstrated to us that this is not going to go away. And so you have to have that business case so people can see this as strategic. And then when you move through, you're starting to live integrated DEI. And that's where it's just part of the culture, whether that's a community, whether it's a workplace, an organization, it's just the way that we go about doing things. And that takes time because it's shifting what the norm is. And trying to change a culture is tough, but you have to be in it for the marathon and not the sprint. And then that will lead you to leading in this space. And when you think about organizations, communities that are leading in this space, unfortunately, the percentages are very low, just because it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of resources to make these things happen when you want to do them strategically. And so over the last probably year, 2 years, especially over the last year, when we saw the senseless killings and things continuing to be shown through videos and social media and those types of things, you will see a lot of organizations that have started putting out statements about how they feel around what's going on from a current events perspective. And that's great. That's a great thing to do because you do want to demonstrate what your stance is. But the problem that I see with that is that if you don't have a commitment to it where you are trying to help change these things, you're just putting out a statement. And I always tell individuals, your clients are watching you, your customers are watching you, and they will take their business or themselves to a different organization that supports the things that are important to them. And I think it's great that people put out statements, but you want to make sure there's some meat behind that. And that will take time. But people will remember and they are watching. But it comes back to being more strategic, and just putting out a letter is more tactical. And so the required shift means you've got to put something into action. And a lot of these things, I've already spoken to them, but I cannot say this enough. And that's the reason why I put it at the top. You have to be intentional. And intentional means being uncomfortable. I know that when individuals, I actually just had someone on LinkedIn send me a message, and I'm not for sure where this organization is at, but they're trying to put together a council to talk about diverse recruiting. And that's from the broader perspective. And that companies are having an issue with diverse recruiting. And so when I think about diverse recruiting, or, if we're looking at as a community, we're wanting to retain individuals here in this community, you got to be intentional about what you're providing for them and what's going to be sustainable. And that intentionality will set you apart from another community and another organization. And so being intentional is the key. Um, we've talked about recognizing that there's a difference between equality and equity. At the end of the day, we would love for everyone to be treated equally, but we're not all starting from the same gate. Where some of us, our gates, they are still closed. And so, you have to, when you're talking about your programming, your initiatives, anything that you are putting in place, you have to be mindful of everyone does not have the same resources, or they may not even have the same ability from where you're trying to start. And so that's why you have to diversify the individuals making these decisions so they can bring that perspective forward. And making sure efforts include the diversity of your community. So that's kind of the same point, but I know we throw diversity around and around, but at the end of the day, diversity can mean generational, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. I can go down the line, disabilities, veterans. You have to have those perspectives. And then my famous phrase, prepare for the marathon, not the sprint, because this is an area that it becomes very stressful, because you're taking on, I know, I read an article on LinkedIn where it said anyone working in this space, you are a counselor, a problem solver, you're strategic, and the list goes on, because there's so many roles that you have to play in order to really make things happen. And so it is a marathon. But once you move through these different aspects, it will begin to change the conversation. And I know sometimes this is not, and especially when you're talking about current events, or especially around religion, politics, any of those things, it does get uncomfortable. But you have to find that person that you can have a transparent conversation with. I'm one of those people, and Lynn can tell you, we can talk about anything, but we are going to agree to disagree sometimes too, because I may not necessarily agree with you, but I am open to having a conversation with you. And, but you have to change that conversation. And then asking questions and not making assumptions, because sometimes I think that because we are uncomfortable, we fear, we don't want to ask questions and or make assumptions. And I remember when George Floyd, unfortunately, when he passed away, I had some individuals come up to me and they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Like, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. And so I just told them, I said, right now, this is weighing so heavily on me. Only advice I can give you is to have conversations with people, or correct people that are saying things that they should not be saying, and that may be in your own family. And just start there. Start with your own network and go from there. And so sometimes, if you are on, so let's just say in the Me Too movement as a female, and I'm not speaking on behalf of all females, but this is a time for us to educate. But sometimes, because we're going through the emotions, it's hard for us to communicate those things. But individuals should not make assumptions, but just find those individuals that you can ask questions of to gain your more knowledge, and just to listen. I know it's hard to listen, especially when you just got so much going on, your emotions are running high, and you want to say things, but when you're having these types of conversations, it really is the time to listen, because you're trying to gain other perspectives. And it's not always about you trying to get your point across. You may learn something by listening to someone else. And so these are some of the things that I always recommend, that if you are looking to shift and take action, to keep these things in mind. And so overall, so what is the value that DEI brings? And so, of course, I've already discussed some. Barriers will begin to be recognized, because I think that through the conversations that I've had with individuals, because they always feel like, well, I'm not that person. It's almost like they put blinders up and they really don't see what the barriers truly are. And so sometimes you have to step back and say, let me look at this picture, not because I'm not like that, but let me really look at what are some of the obstacles that people may have. And so barriers will be recognized. A shift from being from reactive to proactive. So kind of my example about individuals putting out statements when things are going on in society, that's the first reaction you want to do. And sometimes your customers are demanding that you say something. So I do get that. But as you're doing those things, you want to make sure that you have something in mind to support that, and you're being more proactive. But if you are looking at things and you're moving through that continuum from being tactical to strategic, you won't have that reactiveness. You're already being proactive because you're looking forward instead of just in that moment. And so you have to shift your thinking from being reactive to proactive. Of course, the community overall will see longevity and will flourish, because as you're bringing those diverse perspectives and you're becoming that community that people want to stay in, people want to be in. I've had friends who have moved away. I have a friend who moved to Houston, and I even saw today where she posted on Facebook that she misses her friends. And sometimes when I talk to her, she's like, I never thought I would say this, because she's not from Evansville, that I miss Evansville. She's like, but I really do miss Evansville. And I think Evansville does have that. One of the things that I think people feel is that this is a great place to live and raise a family. But we also want people to say, this is a great place where no matter what background you come from, you want to be here and you want to stay here. And that's how you create that longevity and you're able to flourish. The community voice, and I promise, Lynn, I didn't steal this from you. It just popped in my head, community voice. It becomes broader. And so you have those voices that may not have been, had a seat at the table before, but now not only do they have a seat at the table, but they're bringing other people alongside with them. I know that people often say, I don't want to get involved because nothing's going to happen. And, that's just lip service and all of that. But I always challenge people that, you need to be the change that you want to see. And so I think this community is big enough, but also small enough that you can connect with someone who can connect with someone, who can connect with someone, who can get with someone who's making these decisions. And so it does help the voice to get broader. And then, of course, true innovation will be the new conversation. Whenever you think about, because I'm not a very creative person when it comes to just anything in the arts or anything like that. Like, I didn't get that gene, and I'm always so jealous that I didn't get it. But one of the things that I have seen is that true innovation can really be realized through DEI, because you are bringing people from various backgrounds, whether it's trying to solve a problem, whether it's trying to move a business forward, whether it's starting a new activity or a new event within the community. It goes back to, if you have individuals, because they're going through their decision-making process based off their past experiences, and everyone in the network looks like them, thinks like them, acts like them, it's that same circle you're going to go in. And so if you want true innovation, that's where DEI can bring that. And then it just becomes the culture of the community. I hope that I lived to see the day when people like me will be out of a job. That's what I always tell people. Right now I think I'm pretty stable, but I want to be able to see a community, a world that there are no DEI professionals, and that this is just part of the culture. And so these are some of the things that DEI can bring whenever you're looking to implement. And so, will you be prepared? Now, so I went from our current events to this is back over time. It looks very similar. to, we've got, the Women's Suffrage March, we've got 9/11, we've got all these different things. But unfortunately, there's always going to be something that's going to come up. And how are you going to be prepared? Are you going to be prepared? Are you going to be the organization, or are we going to be the community where we don't support Me Too? We don't support Pride. We don't, who are we going to be? And we have to be proactive instead of just waiting around for the next thing, because there's going to be a next thing. And unfortunately, they're coming sooner than later. And so as you think about putting things together, whether it's for the community or for your organization, you want to make sure that you're prepared so that you can be proactive in your approach and not reactive. Because at the end of the day, your clients, your customers, the community, like everyone's watching. Everyone wants to know what you're doing. And social media has taken this to a whole nother level when it comes to being prepared. Unfortunately, I have seen so many organizations that have been caught in the crossfire of what's been going on for the last year. And it's because organizations are not prepared. And so that's what I want to leave you with, is make sure that you are prepared. No matter where you're serving, no matter where you're working, make sure that these things are being talked about. People are being active listeners, so that when unfortunately the next thing happens, you will be on the front lines of being the change that we all want to see. So any questions or comments?
Lori, I'll start off and let people think. I know one of the things we worked on with Diversity Lecture Series was unconscious bias.
Mm-hmm.
So good people, they don't even realize that they've got bias,
Mm-hmm.
which then, and I'm not picking on anybody, like teachers are great, medical people are great, all that. So it may be that if there's an unconscious bias and those kids are being graded lower than other kids, well, then maybe they don't get to go into the medical field. And then all of a sudden we've got not very many people, Black or brown, disabled, whatever it is, in the medical field. And then we don't get the best medical care to the people that need it. So it's a huge cycle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there something we can do to help ourselves and the people around us that we lead with unconscious bias? And I guess I'm also going to say systematic things that are in the system that may even have been put in place to protect people that actually have ended up being racist or discriminatory by different groups. That's a lot, but
yeah, no. And the thing is, so I'm not going to say it. When it comes to unconscious bias training, that has been around for a long time. And like I said, everyone has biases. Everyone, me included, everyone has them. But the thing is I think we get stuck with just doing unconscious bias training. And that's kind of the default, I guess, to say, let's do unconscious bias training. I bet everyone on here has had unconscious bias training. I don't know how many times. I mean, I'm sure everybody has. But the thing is that what do we take from that? But it really is that looking in the mirror. And until someone really admits to themselves that they have a bias, or there's someone who will kind of check them on that bias, we'll just keep talking about that. We'll just keep talking about it. So I think that what I would suggest, and I know that these things are happening now, it's that having those conversations and, people continuing to keep it on the agenda, whether it's the schools or it's healthcare. And I also think that as organizations diversify their boards, they're going to get that perspective in there. And because there's one board that I serve on, and they already know I'm going to ask the same question over and over. I don't care what you're talking about. I'm going to bring up, okay, well, have you thought about, from a female perspective, have you thought about, they know I'm going to do that. And I know they're tired of it, but I'm just going to keep doing it. And it's just kind of like keeping it in front of people. And it goes back to that marathon. It is. It's like you have to keep putting it in front of people. And it does get frustrating. You get worn down by it. But I think that as you bring more people to the table, and the thing is that people have to broaden their network, because there are so many people, even in this community, that can represent various forms of diversity, but we tend to pick the same people. And it's like, there are other people. And if you want to pick the same person, ask them, do they know any other people to kind of bring that perspective. And so I think that unconscious bias training, I'm not saying that it's not good, because it is, but it's like, we can't keep it there, because that's kind of keeping people from having the real conversation. And I know I probably talked that in a circle, but the thing with unconscious bias training is, until it's not effective unless people realize that they have them. And if you're not comfortable checking people and telling them, hey, and usually, like, if let's just say I'm in a meeting, it could be anywhere, not Barry, it could be anywhere. And I notice something that someone says, and I'm like, ooh, they really have a bias there. I'm comfortable enough to say to them after the meeting, I don't have to necessarily check them in the meeting, hey, I was just thinking about your response, and I was just letting you know, did you see the body language of other people, or have you ever thought about it from this perspective? Now, depending upon the personality of the person, they may be offended by it, but I'm still trying to have that conversation with them. But then sometimes we may be uncomfortable doing that. So you may need to bring it to the attention of someone else who can have that conversation. But it's really, with unconscious and conscious, we have to really, like, address it head on, unless it's just going to continue. Because usually what we do is we make excuses for people and say, oh, that's just how they are. Oh, that's just how they are. Well, how long are we going to keep letting them be that way? And so that's kind of my take on that question. So.
Hey,
Thank
Lori,
you.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Lori, this is Miss Huff.
How are you, Miss Huff?
I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you?
Good.
Fantastic. One of the things that I would like you to touch upon, if we have a little bit of time, is that in the process of having all of these issues that we are having today, tell me and tell all of us, where does trust fit in with all of this? Because having almost been twice your age, probably.
No, you're not. No, you're not. I just look young. Maybe I just look young, but no, I'm not quite sure.
I've had a few experiences, but I think that there is a place in all of this that we really have to look at. Some of the things that cause people not to move forward is because there is truly a lack of trust on one side that hears the rhetoric, but doesn't necessarily trust you enough to believe that you're going to do what you say you're going to do.
Oh yeah, no, that's an excellent point, because yes, absolutely, trust it's a big thing. So when I think about it in this space, and being able to trust individuals, I think it just depends on, like, what level we're talking. Okay, let's just say we're talking at a senior executive or the leadership of an organization or whatever. So when it comes to trust, it's really that track record that you're talking about. So you say you're going to do something, but then you're not going to do it. We see that you're not going to address it. And there has to be someone who is courageous enough to have that. It really goes back to, you got to have the conversation with people. Now, if you are leading something, let's just say you're leading D&I, and people don't trust you, it's not going to work, because it goes back to the D&I, the person over D&I has to be respected. And if that person is respected, they can have tough conversations with people. And so I think when it comes to trust, if I had like an example, I could address it, but I just think overall.
Okay.
People
you have the leader of your organization who continues to tell you that they believe in diversity. They believe in doing this, this, and this, but their track record has shown that they say that, but when they are faced with that, they become very angry about being confronted with that.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
And okay,
Yeah.
and so when you don't recognize that you have to go back and reestablish or establish a level of trust,
Mm-hmm.
then all you're having is moot conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I see what you're asking. So in that situation, there has to be someone that the leader trusts who can give them honest feedback. And if they still do not see it, it's almost like you would have to do some type of assessment to give them, because some people are data driven and they have to see the proof in the pudding. So I know, like in organizations, you can do like a 360 evaluation of that person. You can do those types of things. But like in an organization, I'm still going to go back to my original point. Someone has to be courageous enough to address it, because at the end of the day, if that's the leader and they're never going to, or bring it to the attention of, I don't know, the board or whomever they report to, if they don't report to anyone, unfortunately, if they're never going to see it until somebody that they trust brings it to their attention. And I know that's kind of like a window washed answer, but at the end of the day, it has to be someone. I'm still back to, someone has to address it and say, look, these are examples of things that you said that you supported and that you wanted to move forward. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten there. Now there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of respect for your leadership. And I'm trying to see how we can move past that so that we can move forward. Do we need to bring someone else in? Do you need to, provide, maybe someone else needs to be the spokesperson or the face of that. Maybe that's just not something, because they have a bias, and Lynn, I'm back on that, even though I said I wasn't going to get on it, but they have a bias that they're not admitting to. And so unfortunately, that's what has to be done. And I will say this, there are several organizations, even in Evansville, that say that they are embracing diversity, inclusion, and equity. They say it, it's in their mission statements, it's on their website, all these things. But people like me, who I'm a watcher of people, and especially in this space, I'm watching everybody, not critiquing everybody. I'm just watching. And I'm like, you're not doing anything that you're saying that you're going to do. But honestly, I don't have to address it because it's already being addressed. You're not recruiting or retaining the people the expert talent that you really need. You're not being innovative. You're just status quo. If you're a client or customer base, eventually, like I said, people are watching. And so I think that those things will always come full circle. It may take time to get there, but until someone addresses the real problem, I think it's like with anything else. Until you address the real problem, it's just going to be a problem. So that's kind of.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think it's like in anything else, that in order for kids to learn something, you got to repeat it 19 times.
Yeah.
And so this is the same type of thing. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I'm just going to add this one little thing to it. One of the things that I have seen over time in this space is that it's like everything else. A leader doesn't want to admit that they don't understand it or they don't know what to do. Most leaders don't want to do that unless they have a servant leadership approach. When they know that they are there to serve, whether it's their employees or whomever, they're open. But if they have closed their minds down already because of their own biases or their past experiences, they're not going to be open to this concept, because this is not something easy to talk about. And no one wants to raise their hand and say, I'm sorry, I may be the leader, but I have no idea what any of this is about. So, but you've got to provide a space where they can be transparent, whether that's a one-on-one or, sometimes people hear it better from someone externally, more than internally. And also from within this space, it goes back to people have to respect what the professionals in this space have to say. And if you don't have respect for Lori Sutton, you're not going to hear anything that I'm saying when I'm talking about this subject. So that's just a little added.
That's great.
Lori, there's some questions in the chat.
Okay.
I wasn't sure if you could see those or I can read them to you.
Well, let me stop sharing my screen and then I'll be able to see those.
Okay. I think starting with
Lisa.
Seabree, then Dawn,
Okay.
And then Chaz. Yeah.
and then Chess.
Can you
Okay.
be specific about barriers that may not be readily apparent to others? So some of the barriers, so I'll give a couple of examples. I'll give, kind of a work barrier versus maybe something in the community. So Lynn, I know you talked about, systemic or inequities and things like that. So when I think about the workplace, one of the things that I found over time is that some barriers to applying for jobs, that could be a barrier to individuals because they may not understand the process to apply for a job, how to put together a resume, because we know that when you look at someone's resume, that's like the first impression of them. Well, not everyone has taken a resume writing class. They may not know where to get help with a resume. And so they may be a fantastic performer, but they're not able to communicate it on a resume. And so I have seen barriers to people being hired because of their resume, because we critique them on the resume. But then I've seen it to the extreme where I've seen some people who have what other people feel are like brilliant resumes. And I'm like, that's not good. So I think that those are barriers. Other barriers that I can think of is when it comes to hiring is that when you're looking for an experienced individual and you say, well, we want to make sure that we diversify the manager role. Well, if you're not building a pipeline to diversify the manager role, that's a barrier to entry for a diverse candidate, because most of the time you're going to recruit from within your organization. Hopefully that's where you start. And if you have no one in the pipeline, then that's a barrier. And the other thing is that within our community, there are many people who are diverse that are professionals, but if you are not creating the right culture and the right environment, they're not going to leave the job that they're in and come to your role. And so I think those are barriers. When I think about the community, I think it's just access. Sometimes individuals don't have or don't know how to access different things. And I think as a community, we have to do a better job. I've even been looking at, when it comes to COVID and, just being able to get the shot, the vaccine. There may be a barrier there because people may not have access to transportation. They may not, everything is online for you to call, or I think you can call too. But, I don't know if we always think about those things, we want to get it out to people, the vaccine, but there may be a barrier because people don't have access to all the ways, like if you get online, do this, call this person, and I think that those are some of the examples of barriers that may be out there. So hopefully, Lisa, that answered your question. Oh, I think you were shaking your head. Okay. Okay. Could you talk a little about getting those in leadership positions to buy in? Yeah. So I don't know if everyone can see that question, but could you talk a little bit about getting those in leadership positions to buy in? My experience is sometimes the willingness to be uncomfortable prevents commitment. So I think the best place to start is having a conversation with them. I don't know at what level, when you're talking about leadership to buy in, there has to be a conversation. So I talked about it has to be supported from the top. But sometimes the person who's in a lower level has to begin the conversation with them. And so I think it's starting with a conversation because you want to understand the readiness of your organization. That's very important. Um, your organization has to be ready in order for this to be sustainable. And so some of the clients that I've worked with, they are just beginning this journey. And so I started off with them just doing training, just overall training, where we were talking about different concepts. We were talking about, I looked at their websites to see kind of where they are as far as, forward facing, community facing, because I like to bring in their language, whatever their client base is, because you have to help them attach D&I to the services that you're providing. And if you can attach it to something that they understand, I think they'll be more willing to listen to the conversation. And then it's also where you have to come up with what's the business case. So why do we need to do this? Why is this important to us as an organization? Why is it important to us as employees? Why is it important because of customers and clients? So if you can build those things out, those are things, especially if it's a for-profit organization, you can attach it to the bottom line, because you can talk about your diverse customer base or even client base in order to be a sustainable organization. So I think that it is uncomfortable sometimes to have the conversation because they're not for sure where to begin. And having a conversation is a great place to start. And then talking about the readiness of the organization. The role of accountability and measurement. You can manage. Yes, I think Lisa was making a statement. That is exactly right. You can manage what you cannot measure.
Yeah, it kind of went along with Ms. Huff's comment. If an organization is not measuring, especially in the DEI space, then it can tend to be put aside as a nice to have, not a must have. Mm-hmm. So just kind of speaking to that about being accountable by having measurements in place.
Yeah. And so Ellis Red was the one who told me what gets measured gets done. And so that's why you have to make this strategic and not just, well, we're just going to do training, or we're just going to do this. And even though that's where we started, we ended up evolving into something greater. Let's see. Are there any suggestions you can provide for those who participate in D&I work groups for their organization? So if I'm understanding the question correctly, a work group versus a employee resource group. So Chaz sent the question. I just want to make sure that is it a employee resource group or just an actual working group around DEI?
I believe it's an actual work group.
Okay, so for work groups, I think that the best place to start is if you don't have anything started in DEI, is coming up with your position statement and really understanding what position and what is the readiness of the organization. Depending upon the resources that you have available, if this work group is the group that will implement whatever the initiatives will be, just kind of thinking about, you have two jobs and you're only going to do, when you have two jobs, you can't do both of them effectively. So I always tell people you need to assign one person who's going to be responsible for this. And I know that's not always feasible. And so it's identifying what's your position statement, what resources are you going to have? And then that way you can decide, where do we want to start? Do we want to do training? And this is still like you're just checking things off, but you need to move to being strategic. So you got to understand, I always tell people to start with training because you want the organization to understand how you define diversity and inclusion and equity, because there is a overarching definition, but what does it mean to your organization? And that's what's really important. And so when you start off with training, you guide the education and awareness of the organization, because people will go out and Google everything. We all do it. I do it. And so, and so you want to drive, what does that mean to your organization? And not lead them to go out on their own and figure it out. So the position statement, then you define the resources, then you decide where you want to start. And eventually it will grow into someone's role, because it's not going to be sustainable if it's just a work group that's overseeing it. Now, if you have employee resource groups, which they are focused on usually one demographic. So most organizations have African American, veterans, individuals with disabilities, LGBTQA. So they have those various groups. And what that does is that helps to those groups help you to move things forward and ensure that you're always bringing that demographic, and you're not just focused on one thing, you're looking at it from the broader sense of diversity. So there's a couple ways that you can approach it, but I would really start with the position statement so that everyone understands what the organization is going to be committed to. And then you can figure out what resources are going to be dedicated to it. And then you can start off with, we want the organization to understand what this means to them and what it means to whether it's our clients, our customers, our employees, or whomever.
Lori, we've got 2 more questions in the chat. See what you can do with those 2. I think those will be our last 2.
What do you suggest when an organization is stuck in the readiness phase?
Mm-hmm.
So the readiness phase is really that discussion, fact-finding phase. So you just got to put power to action. So I think I kind of answered in this last this last answer is position statement and starting to move past that, because if not, it's just a conversation. And so someone has to stand up and say, you know what, I've already put together what I think this means to us. And sometimes it does take that. It takes that one person who's going to say, okay, hey, I've went out, I've done research. Or what you can do is, if you find people who are in your peer group for that organization, you can give examples of what they're doing. And that could potentially, spark more conversation and then get you to move forward. So peer groups, looking at peer groups, I always call it R&D. It is not research and development. It is rip and duplicate. And so sometimes looking at your peer group, because you're serving the same customers or clients, will help move that conversation forward, because at the end of the day, we want to be the best in that space. And so that's a great way to get you past that readiness phase. And then make sure I'm not missing.
I think you did well. I think Pat Creech has a question next, and that's probably going to be our last one.
Okay. How does measuring a DEI initiative in an organization relate to changing the culture in an organization? Yeah, that's excellent. So as we all know, changing a culture can be tough. And because people get stuck in that, well, it's working. If it's not broken, why do we need to do anything? And so I think that when you think about measuring, you can measure things in DEI from different perspectives. It can be if you have engagement surveys that you do, or post surveys that you do, that is a great way to kind of measure that culture component. So a post survey, so I had someone ask me about, they were doing an engagement survey, but they didn't have anything attached to diversity and inclusion in it. So I asked them, well, what are some questions that you are asking around the culture? And we can kind of put some questions related to D&I in there, so that it doesn't look like it's new, but we know it's new. So, but we're trying to get to that. So I think that that's a great way to kind of measure how the culture is moving, because you need to get that kind of current state to see where the culture's at, in order to see if you're putting in some new DEI initiatives, how it's helping move the culture. The other thing that you can do is focus groups. I think that focus groups, sometimes they get downplayed, but I think having focus groups of diverse groups of individuals can give you a baseline and gives you a diverse perspective. And I mean really making it diverse from all of the different and I hate to use groups, but all of the different perspectives, because that will let you know kind of where the culture is at as well. Changing the culture. And so one of the things with everything else we do within our businesses, within our community, we measure everything. Like people, we can measure all types of things, and we need to see DEI as the same way. You need to measure where you're at, but you also need to set a goal for where you want to be. And I would err on the side of being conservative than being too aggressive, because this takes time and it's not going to change overnight. But I think that if you put something out long term of this is where we want to be, and kind of chip it off a little bit at a time, then you'll feel like you're making progress, and then you have time to readjust, because whatever happens in this day is going to make you readjust, because DEI is changing almost every minute. Because what happens outside, it's brought inside. And so those are some comments I would put around that question.
Lori, you are the best. We're getting incredible comments about when Sheila Hoff says excellent, you've done it. That's all I'm going to say right now.
Thank you.
But Lori, thank you. And we're going to send this out to other people. I'm going to do a little plug. I don't think Lori would, but she has this consulting business. And if your organization is struggling, hire her and let her help you set up a plan and a strategy so that you can be more successful. I believe in good intent, and some of the people doing the goofiest stuff probably think they're doing the right thing. And let's see if we can help them do better. So Lori, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.